in your research, you draw this distinction between self-compassion and self-esteem. And I think this is really important to flesh out for people because self-esteem is often based on achievement and performance and comparison,
Yes.
while self-compassion is unconditional.
Get this. To have self-esteem, we all have to be special and above average. Think about that. It's logically impossible for us all to be above average, all the time. Self-esteem is predicated on a logical impossibility, which is we have to be better than others. It's on social comparison. But the biggest problem with self-esteem is that it's contingent. It depends. We have it when we succeed or when other people like us or we set our goals. But what happens when we fail? Or things go wrong, then it deserts us. It's there for us in the good times, but it deserts us when we need it most. And that's when we've fallen flat on our face.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about compassion, our sense of self-worth comes simply from being a flawed human being.
In today's conversation, we are exploring self-compassion and why this skill matters to anyone who's navigating trauma, healing, personal growth. For so many of us, the voice inside is harsher than anything we'd ever say to a friend. And if you've struggled with extending kindness inward, even while offering it freely to others, this conversation is for you. Research shows that self-criticism fuels stress cycles by spiking cortisol, activating the amygdala, and with self-compassion, this engages the brain's caregiving system, boosts oxytocin, improves vagal tone. So if we know this, why is it still so hard to access? With Dr. Kristin Neff, the pioneering researcher who introduced self-compassion into psychology, we'll explore how self-compassion transforms our relationship to pain, emotional health, resilience, and post-traumatic growth. Welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. I'm your co-host, Elizabeth Kristoff, founder of brainbase.com, an online community where we use applied neurology and somatics for personal growth, resilience, and behavior change. And I'm also the founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification.
And I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace. I'm a neurosomatic psychedelic preparation and integration facilitator, and I bring your nervous system into your peak somatic experiences. And I'm also one of the educators at the NSI Coaching Certification. And today we are thrilled to be in the studio with Dr. Kristin Neff, Associate Professor of Educational Psychology at the University of Texas here in Austin. She's the author of Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, and Fierce Self-Compassion. Dr. Neff's groundbreaking 2003 papers defined and measured self-compassion as a construct, opening an entirely new field of psychological research. This season on Trauma Rewired, we've been exploring the pathways of emotional processing and post-traumatic growth, the ways our nervous systems can move from survival into deeper integration and capacity. Self-compassion is a cornerstone of that journey. It changes how we relate to pain, how we metabolize difficult emotions, and how we find meaning in adversity. Today, we'll take a deep dive into the neurosomatics of self-compassion and explore how this practice supports healing, resilience, and growth. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our audios and find us on YouTube. Dr. Neff, I would love for you to open this conversation up with what led you into the study of self-compassion and how this work has impacted your own journey.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much for having me. Well, for me, it was a personal journey. It was actually my last year of graduate school. I was at UC Berkeley. And it was a really difficult time for me. I had gotten married young and divorced young, and I was feeling a lot of shame about being a failure, at relationships. And then also I was under a lot of stress because I'd spent all this time to get my PhD with no necessary guarantee of getting a job. And I thought, oh my God, I'll be overqualified. What am I going to do? So it was a difficult time. But I was in Berkeley and I'd heard about this thing called mindfulness meditation that was supposed to be really good for stress. And so I went to a course to learn mindfulness meditation. And fortunately for me, it was taught in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a teacher who really emphasized the importance of self-compassion. So the very first night I went, even before I figured out how to meditate or what mindfulness was, the woman leading the course talked about how important it is not only to give compassion to others, but to give compassion to yourself. And to be kind and supportive to yourself like you would a good friend. And it was wow, I've never really thought about that before. It's kind of like a little light bulb moment. And I remember that very first night I went home And I just tried it out. I said, okay, Kristin, yeah, you failed marriage, but it happens to a lot of people. You aren't alone. You did your best. It's a difficult time, but, I'm here for you. I'll get through it. I kind of spoke to myself like I would to a friend. And I was amazed at the immediate difference it made in my ability to deal with what I was feeling. I mean, the mindfulness took a while, but the compassion, almost immediately, I felt calmer. I felt safer. The key is I felt supported. And that helped me bear, all the difficult feelings I was having. And again, I did go on to research it, but to really say it comes from my personal practice over and over again, I saw how it transformed things. Probably, I shouldn't say it's the biggest challenge, but one of the biggest challenges I faced in my life was when my son was diagnosed with autism. And he was pretty severely autistic. And I remember when I first got the diagnosis, because at that time I'd had a lot of self-compassion practice, like I knew what to do. Obviously, I was like everyone trying to figure out what to do, how to help him, but I knew that I couldn't skip over myself, that I had to be with myself, be with the feelings I thought I shouldn't have, like disappointment. How can you be disappointed about this? But because I love my son, but yet there was those feelings of disappointment. It's not the plan I signed up for. Fear, anxiety, all those feelings. So I just was with myself in a supportive way, allowed myself to feel everything I was feeling. And I comforted myself and I supported myself. And that not only helped me, but what I found as he was growing up, because, he really struggled with tantrums and couldn't emotionally regulate at all, that when I was there for myself and I could model emotion regulation through self-compassion, it also helped him.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I'm such an advocate, because not only does it work, I've seen it work in my own life, not just through my research.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
It is really beautiful. And I find so often we come to the things that we give to the world from our own experience. And I feel it comes from such a more powerful, embodied place than... Yeah.
And we really do talk a lot about how we are the living examples, as particularly in our households, and that our nervous systems are so powerful as the regulator, and co-regulation is so important.
Absolutely. It's so funny. Some people think that self-compassion is selfish. When you are regulated internally, every single person you come in contact with, their nervous system is interacting through their mirror neurons with your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So it's not just how we treat ourselves; it's how we show up in the world for ourselves and others.
Yeah.
So
Amazing. On this podcast, we talk a lot about complex trauma, and we call it CPTS because we don't believe it's disordered, right? We take the D off of there. It's our nervous system intelligently adapting. But for so many of us with complex trauma, a hallmark of complex trauma is that really harsh inner critic.
Yeah.
And, I see this with my clients. For myself, I've talked about this many times on the podcast. Like at first, when I was going through my healing journey and personal development and people would tell me to be gentle with myself, it was a physical reaction of like nausea. My body was so used to bracing and being hypervigilant, and that perfectionism and the fear of the retribution of if I made a mistake, if I messed something up, especially like a social rupture. And so I will say it's just such an honor to have you here, because your 3 pillars in looking at self-compassion, I think, make this work so accessible to people. It's not just this nebulous, soft skill, but really ways that we can think about this. And in my own journey, and we even teach about your 3 pillars in our neurosomatic certification course, have people read the book and combine it with nervous system regulation and somatic practices. So I would love for you to go a little bit more deeply into those pillars and how they evolved and what they are for people to hear about.
Yeah. Okay. So there are three really essential elements of self-compassion. And by the way, these are the same elements that go into compassion for others, which we're more familiar with. The first is mindfulness. Perhaps not a mistake that I learned about self-compassion while learning mindfulness. But mindfulness is the ability to turn toward and notice and kind of acknowledge that suffering or pain is present. And it's hard to do that because normally when there's some sort of threat or something that's uncomfortable, we do 2 things. Either we want to run away and pretend it's not there, like that homeless person on the street. I just don't see them. Right. And so if we don't see our own pain, if we just like stiff upper lip it, how can we respond kindly to ourselves? So we need to be aware of it. But in a balanced way. If we're lost in what we're going through, it'd be like, sometimes you call a friend and you just want them to listen and they talk right over you. Sometimes we do that to ourselves. We kind of get lost in our stress and our pain so that we can't see clearly. So we need mindful space just to say, okay, this is happening. This hurts. This is difficult. Then that kind of clears the space for what do I do about it next. Okay, so that's the foundation. And then we need to respond with warmth and kindness and support. In the field of psychology, actually, compassion isn't defined as an emotion, it's defined as a motivation, in particular the motivation to help, to alleviate suffering. So we need to have that motivation toward ourselves. What can I do? What do I need right now? How can I help? How can I be there for myself? And so that's the warmth quality of self-compassion. And then third, and this is key, and by the way, when I was first formulating my model, I didn't realize this element was there, but I'm so glad I put it in there because it's absolutely key, is remembering our humanity. Remembering that we aren't alone. In our society, we kind of think we're supposed to be perfect, and we kind of imagine that everyone else in the world is living a normal, perfect life, and it's just me who's had this horrible experience, or just me who's had that failure, and we feel isolated by our suffering, or for our trauma, or whatever happens in our life. Even if what happens to us is unusual, part of being human is unusual things happen. Like there's nothing wrong with us or abnormal about us when difficulty happens. And yet we kind of think it does. So remembering our humanity in those moments, that this is part of the human experience. It may be uncomfortable, it may be horrific, but doesn't make you abnormal or weird or strange because this is happening. What happens when you remember you aren't alone is then you feel connected to other people. You don't feel so isolated and cut off. And as human beings, when we feel like we're cut off from the group, that exacerbates the threat because then we're left to the wolves. So remembering that we're part of this larger whole helps us feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Like I've been in researching and like listening to you for this podcast, and when I reflect on my own experience and through complex trauma and the way that my F responses are so wired, I really forgot my humanity a lot because I always internalized my mistakes as like and then the shame would take over me, and it was so bad. And then when you talk about in your research, you draw this distinction between self-compassion and self-esteem, and I think this is really important to flesh out for people because self-esteem is often based on achievement and performance and comparison.
Yes.
While self-compassion is unconditional, and and when I think about all of this, and I think, gosh, no wonder, because like I used to operate from such a low self-esteem because I used to not really fit in very well with the matrix, really, and like going against the grain, and like I really pushed so hard, and I just couldn't maintain the status quo. Yeah. And so I really loved listening to this idea and what you talk about with self-esteem. I'd love to explore that a little bit deeper because also I want to say that I've also heard you say that the Latin for compassion is to suffer with.
Yes.
So when you said it's an actionable term, it's in the very root of the word is that it's a word of action.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, so people say, why are you all so focused on pain and suffering, Kristin? I'm like, well, there's love, there's happiness, there's lots of good stuff in the world, but my little niche is how we're suffering because that is in the word. And that's the most difficult thing to be with. And that's what takes us down in these negative spirals. Something difficult happens, we blame ourselves, we judge ourselves, and then down we go. So how we show up for ourselves is so key. And the reason I compared it to self-esteem, actually my first paper was called Self-Compassion, a Healthier Alternative to Self-Esteem, was because I'd actually done a postdoc, 2 years of postdoctoral study with a leading self-esteem researcher. So self-esteem, again, the root of the word, an estimation of worth. We evaluate, am I a worthy person or am I not a worthy person? And usually it's based on social comparison. Get this, to have self-esteem, we all have to be special and above average. Think about that. It's logically impossible for us all to be above average all the time. But if I said,
All the
hey,
time.
this podcast is average, you'd be like, oh. If you say, Kristin, your work is average, self-esteem is predicated on a logical impossibility, which is we have to be better than others. It's on social comparison. Because even if maybe I'm better than these people, but that person over there, I mean, look at Brene Brown or someone like that, right? There's always someone more successful who's getting more fame, more accolades. So it's this actually leads to division because we're comparing ourselves to others. We don't feel connected to them. We're like almost in competition with them. That's the problem. Some people become narcissistic, like they can't let in any possible acknowledgement of flaws because it's such a threat to their self-esteem. But the biggest problem with self-esteem is that it's contingent. It depends. We have it when we succeed or when other people like us or we set our goals. But what happens when we fail? Or other people reject us, or things go wrong, then it deserts us. So I like to say it's a fair weather friend. It's there for us in the good times, but it deserts us when we need it most, and that's when we've fallen flat on our face. And if you think about compassion, our sense of self-worth comes simply from being a flawed human being. That's a box that can always be checked, especially, it's like a good, stable friend. It picks us up when we're down. When a baby's born, they're intrinsically worthy of care and compassion. They don't have to earn it. It just comes with their humanity. And this right to human compassion goes with us our entire life. So when we remember that, there's nothing wrong with self-esteem and being proud of your achievements and everything, but we don't want to base our whole sense of worth on something that's so fragile.
Yeah. This is where the ego comes in, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, if you look at the ego, self-compassion is really not about what makes us stand out. It's about what connects us. Right? And that's where the common humanity is so important. We're all in this together. We're all doing the best we can.
Yeah.
Get this, 95% of our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions are generated subconsciously or unconsciously, which is impacted by our genes, our upbringing, our ancestors, the trauma our ancestors went through. Very little of what we actually experience, you might say, has anything to do with what we normally think of as us. So we are, by definition, part of this larger whole, but we just have this concept that somehow I'm separate from the whole. And that causes a lot of extra suffering that's not necessary.
I think so.
Yeah. And so much of what happens with trauma is that disconnection, right? The isolation that then compounds the trauma. And then that really important distinction between our inherent worth and this like hamster wheel that we're chasing of accolades and achievement that is compounding stress load all of the time.
And then you talked about shame. And so shame, you might say, is the opposite of self-compassion. In my measure of self-compassion, I created a scale to measure it. The opposite of kindness is self-judgment. The opposite of common humanity is feelings of isolation. And the opposite of mindfulness is what I call over-identification, where you take things really personally. What is shame if not self-judgment, isolation, and over-identification? And so that's one of the things we find over and over again in the research. When you approach yourself with compassion, it actually dismantles shame. Shame is just this belief that somehow we're abnormal, something's intrinsically wrong with us, we aren't worthy of kindness. Compassion just turns it on its head and says, no, even if you've done things you regret, you hold that in human. By the way, some people are thinking, well, doesn't this let you off the hook of responsibility? It doesn't. The research shows the more you're able to approach yourself with compassion, the more you're able to acknowledge, hey, I messed up, I screwed up, I really blew it. People are more likely to apologize, they're more likely to want to repair the harms they've done because it gives you the emotional strength to face what's happened.
The capacity to be able to.
Shame doesn't help you do anything except maybe go down in this negative spiral.
It's so self-deprecating.
And it makes you disappear. Guilt can actually play a role. If you hurt someone, you feel guilty, that's okay, as long as you don't take it so personally that it disables you.
Yeah.
I want to dive into the shame a little bit since we're here, right?
Yeah.
And I think we can weave this together really well with the physiological things that are happening with self-compassion versus the inner critic voice or the constant chasing of self-esteem. Because one of the things we often talk about on here is that really hyperactive shame response and the physical components of that. The studies that look at there is heightened inflammation, there are changes in our brain firing, and then some of the really interesting things that I was listening to you speak about and seeing in your research is that internal voice activates the same threat response and pathways in our brain as an external threat.
Yes.
So as it's continuing to play, you're getting the same amygdala activation, the same parts of our brain, like the anterior cingulate cortex, that are firing to watch out for social threat and defining our identity. Like all of these things are being shaped by that inner voice just as much as they would an external threat.
Right.
You've built a career on helping people grow, but if you're ready to create deeper, lasting change, you need more than strategies. You need a nervous system-informed framework. The Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification gives you the science, the tools, and the credibility to lead transformation at the root. Join us at neurosomaticintelligence.com and be a practitioner that the future needs.
And
which
then,
is
of course,
fascinating.
and when you have actual external threat, like with complex trauma, it gets amplified and exacerbated. But threat is the key. I mean, a lot of people ask me, why is it so much easier to be kind to like my friends than it is to myself? Well, when your friend fails, you don't feel personally threatened. When you fail, you feel personally threatened. And by the way, sometimes we're a little less compassionate to people who are super close to us that we identify with because their behavior is because I'm personally threatened us more. So it's all about threat, right? We know this physiologically. When we fail, when we make a mistake, when we feel other people don't like us, or we feel, we're inadequate in some way or limited, we feel frightened. And so the fear response kicks in. Fight, flight, or freeze, we fight ourselves, thinking that somehow, if I fight my problems or my flaws or I beat myself up, somehow it's going to help me change and be safe. And we flee into a sense of shame and isolation. We kind of metaphorically hang our head, flee from the group who we imagine is judging us, and we freeze, we ruminate, we go over and over in our head. And by the way, I have to say, this may surprise you, but this is just a natural part of being human. It's not, you can't blame your parents, because my son, who's autistic, who is the son of the queen of compassion, is very self-critical. And I can see it so clearly because of the autism. If he makes a mistake or something, or I can see he feels like, did I say something that I shouldn't have? I mean, it's so obvious with him. His eyes get wide. He starts moving back and forth.
Watching the dysregulation.
It was really hard for me because he would hit himself. He was never punished by me. He never heard critical words from me, but he saw cartoons where cartoon characters would beat each other up when they did something bad. So it's in the culture, right? And then plus the physiology of thinking that somehow this is going to control the situation. And that's how I would help him. I said, Rowan, you're frightened. You're trying to feel safe. But it's not helping. We can understand it. You don't have to judge your inner critic. You can thank it. Thank you for trying to keep me safe. But it's not as effective as keeping you safe as the care system, which is also natural. But to be honest, it evolved to care for others. It evolved to care for our offspring, our family members, and our group members. The threat system comes on first when we're threatened. The care system comes on when those we love are threatened, And so the care system also helps us feel safe. It creates heart rate variability, heart rate coherence, and self-compassion we know does this. It reduces cortisol levels, reduces inflammation, makes the brain operate differently, helps us feel safe. But the safety comes from the sense of care and connection as opposed to, just a threat system. And it's more effective. It works better. And then once you start to trust that it works better, then those parts of you that feel frightened start okay, maybe, because safety, she hears me. Okay, safety is important to her too. She's just going to use a different method to stay safe that actually, it's more effective.
It's really a lot to build that bridge of connection back to the self when it's been so distorted and disrupted by complex trauma and the inner critic, and, to sit with the pain that we have and try to meet ourselves versus trying to run away from it, trying to manipulate it. And manipulation is that form of resistance I've heard you talk about.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I have to say, it's hard for everyone. In a weird way, it's not totally natural, at least evolutionarily. We didn't evolve for happiness. We evolved for, threat, defense,
Survival.
and safety. But it can be especially hard for people with complex trauma because of a phenomenon we like to call backdraft, which happens to everyone, but it's especially strong with people with trauma. So what backdraft is when we give ourselves a sense of kindness and care. So we kind of, maybe our whole entire lives, especially if you've had trauma, the way you protected yourself was shutting down, numbing yourself, closing down, and contracting. You start opening up with self-compassion, and what happens is, you open up your heart and all the old pain starts rushing out.
Yeah.
And it can feel very overwhelming. And we call it backdraft, kind of like, when you open the doors of a house on fire, the flames rush out. So it's normal, and it's actually a necessary part of the healing process. Because if we keep that pain and trauma locked in our body, it's still impacting us. The only way it can actually be healed is if we acknowledge it with mindfulness and let it see the light of day. But we have to do that safely, slowly, and compassionately.
Yes. And I've heard you say that mindfulness, it can't stand on its own.
It needs the warmth. It needs the warmth, and it needs the care, and it needs the question, what do I need right now? So, these practices we teach, and we can go over them in a bit, maybe like physical touch. For some people, especially if you've been physically abused, for instance, it's just too much. It's actually not compassionate to do it that way. So if you have backdraft, if it opens up pain, the kindest thing you can do is to do something else. It's the intention to help yourself, which is compassionate. How you do it doesn't matter so much. Maybe in my case, I'll have a cup of tea, or I'll pet my cat or my dog, or I'll take a walk. Maybe that's the best way that physiologically I could regulate my nervous system. Maybe touch is too much, and that's okay. So this is the beauty of backdraft. As backdraft comes up, it's a sign that, okay, there's some pain here that needs attention. What do I need in this moment to feel safe so that I can start to heal in a way that's not overwhelming for me?
Yeah, I love that so much, because a lot of what we talk about on here is N equals one, like the uniqueness of every nervous system based on our past experiences and daily habits and everything. So developing a practice of really beginning to understand yourself, what is soothing to you, what is regulating to you, and knowing that it's not going to be the same for Jennifer, for me, for you, and we begin this exploration of really learning ourselves at that deep level. And as you were talking about these big outputs of dysregulation that can come from moments where we feel like maybe we've ruptured a relationship or we've made a mistake, and how you can see that exemplified in the nervous system of your son, the movement, the change in the eye movement or the posture. And I just thought about so much of my life, like flailing around trying to regulate through that discomfort, and why that would keep me from being able to be compassionate with myself, because it was so intensely uncomfortable at a nervous system level to open up that vulnerability, the backdraft.
Yes.
And so I know for me, a lot of this work has had to come with learning about my nervous system, practicing tools, increasing capacity, having skills to modulate and regulate through this experience. But also keeping in mind everyone's nervous system is different. I'd love for us to talk about some kind of minimum effective dose practices, things that people could start to think about to ease into this place of self-compassion.
The good news is the minimum effective dose is pretty small. There's a study that came out last year out of UC Berkeley that showed that 20 seconds a day, and in this case, they had people use some sort of touch, which might be hands on heart, or, holding yourself, or whatever sort of touch. Again, petting your cat if that feels more comfortable, plus some words of support, something like you'd say to a friend, I'm here for you. What do you need right now? How can I help? So some words of support and kindness. That 20 seconds a day is enough to significantly increase self-compassion. So you don't have to meditate for half an hour, or do loving kindness meditation, or go on retreat. It's really the consistency of the intention to be there for yourself. So it really doesn't take a huge amount of effort, which is the good news. It's really just a shift of how we relate to ourselves. And if you think about what that shift is, it's actually, I hope I'm not getting too esoteric here, but I think it's important. It's a shift in your sense of self. So there's this part of us that needs compassion, which is the suffering self, and that we feel hurt, we feel wounded, we feel traumatized, we feel incapable, we feel flawed, all those things. The moment you give yourself compassion, you've shifted out of the part of you that needs compassion into the part of you that's capable of giving compassion. And this self, we're much more familiar with it with friends or animals or loved ones. We feel more capable. We feel more connected. We don't feel so contracted. Our hearts are full. And again, a lot of people, some of the most kind, connected people to others treat themselves horribly, and they aren't even necessarily correlated. So the moment you shift from being identified with the contracted, limited self to the more expansive, compassionate self is a big perspective shift that has knock-on effects. Physiologically, again, it reduces inflammation, calms the nervous system, and then leads to a lot of healing.
Yeah.
It only takes a second to shift from one to the other.
20 seconds is doable.
I don't care how busy you are.
I mean, it is really doable.
Yeah.
It's like,
And I love too the idea of, with the social connection and relational components being so threatening that like if you do have animals, they can often be such a huge component in healing because people who have animals know how to offer compassion to them and be caring and kind towards them.
Right. So we all have that part of ourselves. Maybe we aren't so used to having it all the time, but there's usually some context. Maybe you're a gardener and you love plants.
Yeah.
And so if you access that part of yourself and then adopt that perspective towards yourself, then all the physiological benefits will come and you can actually help comfort and soothe yourself and support yourself. The thing that probably surprised me the most about my self-compassion work is it's not rocket science. It's actually not that difficult because you aren't learning a new skill. You already know how to do it. You've developed it at some point in your life. Most people have, maybe a few, but most people have learned, even to a teddy bear or to an animal or something, how to be kind and nurturing. You just have to remember to adopt that point of view towards yourself.
Is this the care system that we all have built inside of us?
It's part of our evolution as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
We talk so much about social safety being a real survival need.
Yeah.
And that care system is there it is part of our evolution and development to stay connected.
Yeah.
And I love the practice that you were talking about because one of the biggest relationships that I have healed over time is the relationship to my own body and coming back in. And it really began just by taking about 20 seconds when I felt sensations, right? And couldn't name them, didn't have the skill for that. Something was happening inside of me and just putting my hands on my body and spending 20 seconds dialoguing. What do you need from me? How do you want me to be with you?
Yes.
And then couple breaths there, maybe something intuitively arises, regulate through that and go on about your day, and then little by little over time, having that create some shifts.
And you don't even have to know what you need.
No.
Is asking the question that's so important. It's affirming that my needs count too. And especially with a lot of people with complex trauma, maybe they weren't treated like their needs mattered.
Yes.
And then so there's a lot of work also developmentally with self-compassion that shows if you weren't given that sense of your needs matter as a child and you have, insecure attachment or, some other some problems there and how you were treated when you were young, you can actually reparent yourself. There's research showing you can get what's called earned secure attachment. Like maybe your parents weren't there consistently to meet your needs, but as an adult, you can learn to consistently meet your own needs and start creating what they call an internal working model. I don't know if you talk about attachment much.
We do.
Okay,
the whole season.
But okay. So you can create this secure internal working model. I'm a person worthy of getting my needs met because every time I'm upset, I don't even know what I'm feeling or what I need. But I ask, what do you need right now? How can I help? And then you're getting that idea that my needs count too.
And they always did count. You were always worthy of love and care and attention. And, I think too, you speak to something that that often comes up in this work is that people need to have this idea of like what happened to them. And like, we don't need to know all those things.
Yeah.
It's just important that I think that we learn how to connect to our body, learn and feel the sensations and just work with that and continue to create safety. And, I think so many of us as women are I want to use the word structured, like built in a way to always have a tender side. And it's not always like we're critiqued either way. We're either too tender, not tender enough. And, we're taught to nurture and to care for others and often to turn away from ourselves and that our needs are not the most important. And that's really not true. I think we kind of opened up with that even.
We did a meta-analysis of gender differences in self-compassion. Who do you think had lower levels of self-compassion, men or women?
Women.
Yeah. It's slight, but it's consistent. Even though if you go to one of my workshops, 85% of the people who show up are women. Because it's part of the female gender role. Compassion is, but toward others. But so men are also harmed because they aren't, they can often be bullied if they're too sensitive. If they're too compassionate, it can actually kind of be almost even beaten out of them. Boys are also very much harmed by the fact that they aren't allowed to be sensitive. But they are allowed to get their needs met. Right. And so gender plays a role, especially with, I don't know if you guys want to talk about this, but what I like to call fierce and tender self-compassion, I think is relevant to what you said, because there are really two main expressions of compassion. There's what I call tender self-compassion, and that's more about acceptance. It's more of a softer, nurturing energy. It's more what a parent would have with the baby who was crying. We soothe ourselves, we comfort ourselves. But caring for ourselves also sometimes means getting angry.
Yes.
If someone's threatening you, you need to draw a boundary. You need to say no. You need to protect yourself. You need to say this isn't acceptable. Or motivating change. If you're engaged in behavior that's not helping or someone else is, we need to change things.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to call fierce self-compassion. And what I find is that women are socialized to be tender, but not too fierce. We don't like women who are too assertive or ambitious or, God forbid, angry. We feel uncomfortable around that. And so that's socialized out of women. And we don't like men who are too tender. And that's socialized out of them. And it's like yin and yang. We all need both. We need to be balanced. If we're too tender, but we don't stand up for ourselves, we're doormats. But then again, if we're all about like my way or the highway, then we're aggressive and stressed.
Yes. Yeah.
So we need both in balance. And so that's why I like to think of self-compassion as a radical act, because we're kind of saying, I don't care what socialization says. This is part of being human.
Exactly.
I'm going to reclaim both sides of myself.
And when I think about, we kind of take things back to nature, and it's like, look at Mother Nature. Nothing out there is just always calm all the time. She's fierce.
Yeah.
She's really fierce. And I like to also embody that too, as a natural wisdom that we have, is to just not always be sitting back and being tender.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if we're fierce with our hearts open, then we don't dehumanize anyone.
Yeah.
The problem is we're fierce and we dehumanize people, then we're just part of the problem.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's this idea, I think, going back to self-esteem, that there's some sort of hierarchy of bodies. And at a soul level, that is, I'm not better than anybody. There are so many more people out there that are more than me in various ways. But at a real soul level, no one is greater or lesser than anybody here. And no one's getting out alive. So let's be kind.
Yeah, I am really glad that you brought up the fierce versus tender self-compassion, and did definitely want to talk about that, because so much of what we talk about too is the need to be able to set boundaries and care for ourselves, and this idea that being regulated is not being calm all of the time.
Yeah.
It's also expressing big emotions and standing up for when there's an injustice or when there's a boundary that's violated. And being self-compassionate also doesn't mean being soft all of the time.
No, it's not caring to yourself if you let people walk all over you, if you don't, stand up for what you deserve and being treated fairly.
Yeah.
And, if you look at the world today, we need to accept that we can't change everything. We can just only do our best. But the fierce self-compassion is what motivates us to try to do our best. And we can make some changes. We can't control things, but we actually can draw boundaries.
Yeah. And recognizing the shame, just back to shame right quick, because I think what you're saying is that's what's coming up for me, is recognizing that I can swing that shame a little bit too through being self-compassionate, because understanding my shame response has been a total portal into self-compassion for me.
That's so beautiful. So my colleague Chris Germer, we did a lot of work developing self-compassion training together. He calls shame the flip side of love. That if you pick up shame and say, what's driving shame? It's the wish to be loved. I mean, all human beings, from the moment we're born, we want to be loved, we want to be connected. But unfortunately, we put all our eggs in the basket of other people. Hopefully our parents were there, but they may not have been. Society may not.
Yeah.
People don't really like it when we draw boundaries. They like us much better when we're compliant and docile, right? And so realizing that we can give ourselves that love and acceptance. And once we realize we aren't so dependent on that, we can meet some of our own needs, then shame loses some of its grip. I mean, it still hurts. And also shame is a evolutionary emotion as well. It played a role. And back in the day, if we pissed off the group, we'd be shunned.
That's right.
We don't like that. There's a reason for that, for social cohesion. But again, the brain is now reacting to how do I look at my dress, as opposed to, did I do anything that was really worthy of being kicked out of the group? Yeah. So,
and the perfectionism, too,
Yes.
as a driver.
Yes. We think our worthiness comes from getting it right.
Yeah.
But our humanity comes from getting it wrong.
Yes.
It's true that failure is our best teacher, but somehow we forget that when we fail.
Yeah, because
absolutely.
we internalize that as ourselves, and that inner critic comes in is so harsh.
Yeah.
And I think what you were saying too about understanding the biological role for some of these things, so that we can have self-compassion when we look at our shame. And we like to talk on here a lot about everything is a skill, and and it's been practiced over time, right?
Yeah.
These responses were adaptations to keep us alive in the moment, to keep our connections met. But then what was our developmental training ground that maybe led to a very hypervigilant, very reactive shame response or perfectionism? But then also remembering, as we're talking about all of this, these were skills that were developed for our survival, and we're neuroplastic beings. So we can continue to repattern and we retrain when we have these small, accessible ways to begin to have a new embodied experience with self-compassion.
Yeah, so the good news is not only can we change our reactions by rewiring our neurons, even when those old patterns arise, you learn to disidentify with them. So that thought, that reaction, I still feel shame. It's not like I don't feel shame, but when shame arises, I'm not fused with the shame. I don't believe the shame. I realize, I'm experiencing shame.
Yeah.
But who am I? I'm the loving awareness that's aware of the shame.
Yes.
I'm not the shame. I am loving awareness itself.
It is such
think
an
about
important
that.
shift.
When you realize you are loving, connected presence, which is the three components of self-compassion: mindfulness, common humanity, and kindness. When you're loving, connected presence, that's a good place to be.
Definitely. It is. And I think it's hard for complex trauma survivors, in the beginning to really understand that. And that's why this is more on the path of post-traumatic growth, because we create this safety, we use NSI, we work in the neurology of our system, we heal deficits, we get into emotional processing, and we can connect. And then the broader of these concepts really comes into more of an embodiment place.
Yeah. But so you two are the experts here, but it also seems that for some people, by having intense traumatic experiences, some people, it's actually able to flip them into an incredible wisdom and compassion and empathy you may not have had if your life was just
100%.
Completely.
Everything went well and fine. So I'm not going to say that it's a gift, but that's why I like the idea of post-traumatic growth and not disorder, because for some people, they've used it. I mean, incredible wisdom, understanding, kindness, empathy, in a way that may not have happened quite the same way.
We are really exploring that this season and walking that line of these experiences, though we wouldn't wish them on anyone, also led to everything that we do now, the work that we have, the connection that we have to people. And for so many of our listeners and clients, maybe the trauma itself is not a gift, but they are the gift.
They're the gift.
They are the gift, and the whatever it is that they're able to put out in the world from these experiences truly is the trauma is the portal. To be able to have that.
And I've heard you say we're actually recording a conversation after this on post-traumatic growth and wisdom.
Okay.
And I heard you say, I don't know where it was, that compassion and wisdom are two wings of a bird.
Yes. I didn't come up with that one. It's a kind of
I
old
loved
saying,
it.
but
It was
it's very
beautiful.
true. Compassion and wisdom are two wings of the bird. And so wisdom is what allows us, first of all, to see the interconnectedness of all things. Wisdom, so at least from a Buddhist context, and, I kind of learned about it from Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Buddhist. Compassion is really seeing how things are interrelated, how everything we do is inextricably interwoven with so many things that we normally think of as not me. Again, our genes, our history, our culture, what we ate that day. We know now that our gut biome makes a big difference. I mean, you don't usually identify with your gut biome, right?
Yeah, but it's
And so once you have wisdom and you see how what we experience is just, it's just life flowing through us. We are the vehicle through which life flows. And when you connect with that life, that vehicle through which life flows, then the warmth and the love just naturally arises. And so they feed each other. Sometimes I think people, they can go too much on the mindfulness end of just, well, the thoughts aren't real, the emotions aren't real, I'm just kind of observing. But there's coldness there. And that's not life. Life isn't cold. The sun is bright, but it's also warm. Naturally.
Yeah.
You don't have to make it warm. It is warm. It's kind of a metaphor for what I think inside of us, of all of us, is this loving awareness. This just part of our, you could say it's part of our nature. You could say it's our true nature. It's underneath our, everything else. And it can be tapped into. And it's not like people with trauma are cut off from it. Yes, there's a lot of things happen that can make it difficult. But as you said, and for some people, it can make the springboard to find a depth of an open heart that is just phenomenal.
Yeah. Agree.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful. I think that's a perfect place to
Are there
end. Unless
anything you
else.
would like to leave listeners with besides that incredibly beautiful thought?
Well, there's one point I haven't made, which I want to bring up just because we find in research the number one block to self-compassion is people think it's going to undermine their motivation. A lot of people have learned to motivate themselves by being hard on themselves and think I'll be lazy, I won't achieve if I'm not really mean to myself. And just to say, and the research unequivocally shows that self-compassion is a more effective motivator. You still want to motivate change, but out of care, not out of fear of inadequacy. So when you still want to make a change, you want to reach your goals, not because I better reach my goals, otherwise I'll be worthless, but I want to reach my goals because you know what? I deserve to reach my full potential. What happens, a big shift is when you make a mistake, you're able to learn from them. Look at, we've actually did a lot of research with athletes. If their self-esteem is invested in their performance, they miss a shot and then down they go because I'm worthy. What does it say about me? But we taught athletes how to be self-compassionate, and it improved their performance because they could say, "Oh, that's how I learned. What can I learn from this? I'm not going to take it so personally."
Inner resilience.
Inner resilience. And it actually makes us more effective and perform better. So because it's such an entrenched belief, every time I talk about this, I just need to say it's been disproven.
So glad that you brought this up because I was just recently at a conference. We also, we have a lot of listeners that are also like high performers, right? Very ambitious, successful people that also have a history of dysregulate. Who doesn't really, right? Like we live in this world.
Yeah.
And I was at a conference with a lot of very high performing women and gave a talk on the nervous system. And afterwards, so many of them would come up to me and share the struggles that they were having about their dysregulation and their stress outputs. But there was like an underlying thread of don't tell anyone else about this. I'm only telling you because I need to keep the performance out here. And I really saw how the disconnection part of that, right? Like here's this beautiful community of very strong, empowered women, but they are also still struggling in all of these ways. And that vulnerability was keeping them from connecting with one another over these shared experiences that if they had access to self-compassion would allow that door to open more because they were all also really craving community.
Yeah.
And then that there was a thought I could feel in everyone of like, if I am more compassionate with myself or even more regulated, I'm going to lose my edge. I'm going to lose what made me successful to get here. And so I think it's such an important thing to bring up.
Yeah, well, as we know, a regulated nervous system, we can think better, you can act more clearly, you're more capable of achieving your goals.
Yeah.
And you're in your body, right?
You're in your
To
body.
be the experience of, like you were talking about, of this like fully loving vessel of life force energy. And it's like, how can we do that if we're not in our bodies?
Exactly.
Right. So.
But it is true, your priorities might shift a little bit. You may
Yes,
start
they may.
valuing relationship more than,
Yes.
you know.
And isn't that beautiful? I mean, isn't that, it can be better.
Yeah.
You know, better than you can really ever imagine, because I think what we imagine it to be is so limited until we do experience that inner resilience and that inner strength and that growth and wisdom as the driver versus the shame and the inner critic.
And happiness. I mean, one of the most powerful findings, even though self-compassion is aimed at suffering, people are happier because it feels good to be, have your awareness fused with loving, connected presence.
Yes.
Feel more happy, feel more peaceful, feel less stressed. I mean, that's what we want. That's what we think the fancy house and the fancy clothes is going to give us. No, it's right inside of us.
Yeah. Well, you can really have it all.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for being here today. It was really an honor to be able to talk with you, and thank you for your work that you put into the world. It is life-changing for so many people.
Yeah. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's so important.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you've been hearing the call to go deeper, to work smarter, to serve more powerfully, the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification was built for you. This is your time to lead the next evolution in healing and human potential. Reserve your spot at neurosomaticintelligence.com.